Hey everyone, this is Scott Clem with Preaching in Politics, doing something a little bit different today in that I'm going to talk about something more political, and this is happening more in my community. So if you're outside of the community, this might be, well, I don't want to say it's going to be boring because I think it's going to be really interesting, but it's not going to be as relevant to you. Now, the subject matter, however, will be relevant. And so what we're going to be talking about today is in my community in Gillette, Wyoming. The city of Gillette is trying to enact a hate crimes ordinance. And this is commonly something that when I was in the legislature, we called a SOGI law, in that it has to do with sexual orientation and gender identity. And there's various types of these types of ordinances or pieces of legislation that are brought up in many different political bodies, whether you're talking about at the national level or at the state legislature or even down to the municipal level. And so I'm going to be talking about what that is and what we can do about it, particularly in my community, but also if you are dealing with something like this in your state or your community, and chances are that you are, there's only 2 states, just 2, in the union that do not have some kind of hate crimes law or ordinance, and Wyoming happens to be one of them. So chances are you have something like this already on the books, and we're going to talk about what that means for you and how that ties into social Marxism, critical race theory, some of those things that are, looked upon very highly by the left. All right, so that's what we're going to look at today. So first of all, I want to make an important announcement really up front, and I'm doing this more as in a podcast kind of style thing, and I'll probably do some others as well because I was actually pouring through some of the state statutes of Wyoming, and I found something really, really interesting. So I definitely have to do a follow-up video as far as the powers of the mayor that the mayor has in our city, but I'll do that another time. What I do want to do is make an announcement in that it's this. If you are in the city of Gillette community and you are concerned about this, then today is what is it, Tuesday, May the 16th, 2023, and they will be having a council meeting tonight for a second reading of this ordinance, and this will be your one and only, your final opportunity. I shouldn't say one and only. They had an opportunity a couple weeks ago, but this will be your last opportunity to speak to the council in a public comment forum. You say, well, why is that? Well, bear with me here. Let me explain the process. Any ordinance that the city of Gillette or any town in Wyoming, by state statute, it has to go through 3 readings. And these readings need to be at least 10 days apart. And so what happened is 2 weeks ago, the first reading of this hate crimes ordinance was introduced, in which at that time they held a public hearing and they received public comment. Now that was the one and only time that they had to do a public hearing. But if you go to any kind of city council meeting, at least in Campbell County, then oftentimes what you'll find is they'll have a public comment section at the very end of the meeting, and you can spout off on things. It doesn't even have to be relevant to this ordinance. It could be anything, but you share public comment with the council, or they do the same thing with the Campbell County Commission as well. So my point is this. With this hate crimes ordinance, we're now at the second reading. Okay, that's tonight. And they're not going to have another public hearing. They already did that. They did that 2 weeks ago. That's it. That's all they're legally required to do, and they're not going to do that again. But you still can give public comment. Now, if you go to the city council meeting tonight, chances are they will either amend and pass the ordinance, or they will just pass the ordinance as is. It'll be more of a formality. There may not even be a whole lot of discussion. They will do that. And then tonight, after they do all of that, you'll be able to give your public comment and you'll be able to share why the council really should reject this thing. There'll be a third and final reading 2 weeks from now, or roughly 2 weeks from now. And it'll be kind of the same process. Only, you could show up to that meeting, and at the end of the meeting, there'll be public comment again, and you could speak out on it. But by that time, they'll have already voted the third and final time on that ordinance, and it's either going to become enacted into law or it's not. So if you followed all of that, my point is this: tonight is the time for public comment. If you want to be heard, if you want to speak out in a public forum before this thing is enacted into law, then tonight you need to show up at Gillette City Hall at 6 o'clock to speak your mind, whether you're for or whether you're against. Now, of course, I'm against. I make no bones about that, and I'm going to tell you why I'm against here in just a moment. So remember that announcement, okay? One more time. City of Gillette, City Hall, 6 o'clock tonight, Tuesday, May 16, 2023. They're going to have a council meeting. This is going to be your one and only time before this potential ordinance gets enacted into law, if they enact it into law. It'll be your only time to speak out tonight. Now, you can always contact your city councilman or the mayor, offline, but you won't have that opportunity again in a council format. Tonight is the last time, the last opportunity you'll be able to do that. Okay, so let's talk about what this ordinance is. Now, I'm not being filmed today, but what I am doing is filming my screen, and I wanted to kind of run through the ordinance, what it is. I want to talk about why they're doing it, because that's really important. And I also want to talk about what I think personally is really going on with this type of thing. First of all, let me give you a little bit of background information. I served in the Wyoming legislature from 2015 to 2020. I served 3 terms. I chose not to run for a 4th term because at that time I had recently taken on a church. I'm not at that church any longer, but I'd taken on the church with the caveat that I needed to spend more time at the church, and so I retired, quote unquote, retired from the legislature, choosing not to run again for a 4th term. In 2015, when I first ran for the legislature, the idea of SOGI legislation, it was a hot topic because it was going on all over the country. Now, this is, of course, on the heels of the Supreme Court ruling that allowed for gay marriage and whatnot. And so you had a lot of these different states and a lot of this different SOGI legislation. And what's interesting about the SOGI legislation is that, whether you're talking about at the federal level or at the state level, many different state constitutions or state statutes already have provisions in there about discrimination. They even do that at the federal level. And oftentimes, and this, it is what it is, but what they do is they identify certain groups of people that, in particular, that you shall not discriminate against. And usually, the main groups have been based upon age, color, or race, gender, whether you're male or female, and disability. I think that's about 4 of them. And usually, that's what we have in our own state. In our own state statute. I think it's in our state constitution, and that's generally what it is. Now, we're living in a time where people have wanted to expand that. They want more government-sanctioned, protected groups, and what they've wanted to do is they've wanted to create special classes for sexual orientation and gender identity so that you could not discriminate against someone based upon those 2 criteria as well. And of course, it has exploded even more recently because now we have all sorts of different things. Of course, religion is another one that was put in there. Gender expression, right, is another one. I mean, it becomes almost kind of ridiculous, but this is the world that we live in. And so there was SOGI legislation that arrived in 2015 when I first was elected to the legislature. Now, the prior term, when I wasn't serving, it had passed the House. A piece of legislation had passed the House, but it failed to pass in the Senate. Thank God for a bicameral system. Nebraska doesn't have it, but everybody else does, and I certainly thank God for that. When I was in there, it flip-flopped. It passed the Senate, and then the bill came over to the House, and people were sweating bullets because while there was, every election cycle you have some turnover in the different, whether that's a House or Senate, there was some real worry that this SOGI legislation was going to be enacted into law, that the House was going to pass it. And really, almost in miracle fashion, the House voted it down. I mean, it was... I could take a whole podcast and just tell you the story of that. It's pretty cool. But all that to say this, the lead group in Wyoming for, the LGBTQ, etc. crowd is Wyoming Equality. They're the nonprofit. They're kind of the lead lobbyists in the state for these issues for the alphabet crowd, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I think everybody understands what the alphabet crowd is because it's the LGBTQ, etc., etc. There's a whole long list, of litany of things. In any event, they changed tactics. They had worked for a long time trying to enact state legislation, and it just didn't seem to get done. And so what they decided to do instead is they decided to take their law and put it on a local level in the form of an ordinance. And so they went to Wyoming's largest towns. They went to Cheyenne. They went to Casper. They went to Laramie. They went to Gillette. They went to Jackson. And they tried to pass these ordinances into law. And they did with, quite a bit of success. I think everybody except for the city of Gillette has passed one of these into law. It was 2016 when the city of Gillette was tinkering around with an ordinance like this. And the council didn't have the appetite for it, which was pretty cool at that time, even though the mayor did. And so what happened is they changed it into a resolution. A resolution is a bark without the bite. A resolution essentially is a proclamation of this is who we are, this is what we believe, and it has the effect of governing the human resources policies for the city of Gillette, but it doesn't really affect the rest of the community. So they put it in the form of a resolution during that time, and the resolution was on the books. And now they're taking a second bite at the apple here today, which is what we're dealing with now with this ordinance. All right, so this is kind of where this is evolved and where it's come from. This isn't a new thing, Wyoming Equality, and the lobbying groups behind this type of legislation. They've been working behind the scenes very diligently for a long time, and they are seeing the fruit of their work. Meanwhile, most people who just want to, they just want to work, and they want their streets to be taken care of, and they really just want government to be boring, haven't really been paying attention, and now all of a sudden we have this division in our community because this ordinance is just really, really, really bad. And so I want to take you through the ordinance, how this particular ordinance is written, and just make some comments on that. So I'm going to pull this up on the screen here, and you can see this. And you'll notice you got the different recitals and whatnot here. The governing body of the city of Gillette previously adopted resolution number blah, blah, blah in 2016. And so they're giving their litany of why they think they need to adopt this ordinance now. Okay? So what they're going to do is they're going to create a new section, section 1442 of the Gillette City Code, to criminalize certain conduct that's antithetical to the above stated policy that they've put into place. All right, so they are making a statement, and they're saying that this behavior is so bad that it needs to be criminalized, and we need to charge people with misdemeanors and either make them pay $750 as far as a fine, or we need to throw them in jail. I can't remember if there's jail time in this. We'll find out if it is or not. By state statute, ordinances are allowed to put someone in jail, I think up to a year, something like that. All right, so this is how it goes. Therefore, be it ordained by the governing body of the city of Gillette, it resolves as follows. It creates this new section here, and the section is this. It's 1442, and here's the title: Malicious Harms Based on Race, Color, Religion, Sex, Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, Gender Expression, Ethnicity, National Origin, Ancestry, or Disability. Now, I don't know how many, I haven't counted how many different classes they're creating, but essentially what they're doing is this is government discrimination. This is now the government looking at you, the citizen, and they're not looking at you based upon the content of your character, but they are identifying you according to which class of people you belong to. This is classic identity politics. It is discrimination by the government because they are looking at you according to some other criteria other than the content of your character and what your actions, what you contribute to society. It's completely antithetical to really Martin Luther King. in any event, it goes on and it says this. Now, here's the statute. All right, so that's the title. And so there's two provisions. There's Section A and there's Section B. Now, I have contended that Section A reads a little bit wonky. And this just to give you kind of a little background, in the criminal statutes, if you look through the Wyoming statutes, you will find such things that a person is guilty of such and such crime and usually there's criteria. If it's this and or this or this, and it's something along those lines. Now, Section A is somewhat organized in those terms, but it just reads wonky. So it says this: no person shall maliciously and with specific intent to intimidate or harm another person because of their race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, ethnicity, national origins, ancestry, or disability, cause physical injury to another person, cause another person's real or personal property to be damaged, destroyed, vandalized, defaced, trespassed upon, or stolen for any period of time, or threaten in any manner to do any act prohibited above, if there is reasonable cause to believe that such an act will occur. Now, at first glance, when I read over this, I thought to myself, you know what? Causing physical injury to another person is already a crime. That's assault and battery. Causing another person's real or personal property to be damaged, destroyed, or vandalized or defaced, that's already a crime. These are already crimes. And they are already crimes. These things are already on the books. So what does this law do in particular? What it does is it charges a person with a secondary crime. It charges a person, you might almost think of it as an enhanced penalty. In other words, what this law is saying that if you cause physical injury to another person, and it can be proved that you did that because you discriminated against one of these protected classes, well then you can be charged not only with regular assault or battery, but also you can be charged on top of that with this hate crime in that you assaulted somebody because of, you were out for their protected class. That's kind of the idea here. And so that's what this does. It creates a carve-out for certain people, certain protected classes, reverse discrimination in a sense. The government is saying, we're going to discriminate. We're going to say that these groups of people, we're going to designate them now as special classes. And if you do something to one of them, then we're going to punish you even more. So this is where an example, I guess, really helps. Many of you might know, you may not know, I was paralyzed in a skiing accident when I was 19. I'm physically disabled. I use a wheelchair to get around. And under this statute, if someone came and assaulted me, right, they beat me up because, and it could be proved, they did it because they hate disabled people. They hate people in wheelchairs. Well, then that person would not only be charged with battery, but that person would also be charged with a hate crime on top of that because they came after me. All right. Now, my daughters, on the other hand, I know I'm a polarizing figure. My time in politics, people either love me or hate me. The Clem name is known around my community, and it either gets cheers or it gets jeers. It's one of those things. And let's say that somebody beat up my two girls. My older daughters. Let's say someone, because they hated me, they beat up my two daughters. So how would this thing play out? Well, the person who beat me up would be charged twice, once for assault and once for a hate crime, right? They'd be charged doubly because now they're going after a protected class that's been designated by the government. But what about my girls? My girls were also, someone beat them up, and so their perpetrator would likewise, they also would be charged with assault, but they wouldn't be charged with the hate crime, even though it was based on hate. It was based on hate of their father, but, hating fathers isn't a type of protected class here that the city of Gillette is creating. So in other words, two crimes happen that are very equivalent, but my perpetrator gets punished more because I'm a protected class, but my girls' perpetrator doesn't get protected, it doesn't get punished as much. because they're not in a protected class. And so in other words, what you find is you have this inequity in the law, this inequality in which some people, according to the government, via this statute in the penal code, some people are treated more equal than others. If you belong to a protected class and this, something happens to you, and it can be proved that it's based on some sort of hate as defined by this statute, well, then, that person's going to get punished even more. But if you just, if someone beats you up, and, apparently, I guess beating somebody else up is not a hate crime, which is kind of ironic, right? I mean, when you think about it, in a sense, all crimes are hate crimes because you don't commit a crime against someone that you love, right? So in any event, but here's my point: there's inequity, there's inequality. In other words, what this ordinance does, and what legislation like this does, is it takes the blindfold off of Lady Justice, who is supposed to be blind, and it treats one person with more privilege than another person. And this is where we get into the whole topic and discussion about critical race theory, or what some call social Marxism. Now, we're all familiar with socialism and Marxism, at least on an economic scale, right? When we think of socialism economically, it's you have two different people, and one person works really, really hard, and because of their hard work, they expect to get paid more, and then you have someone who's just a lazy bum and doesn't doesn't work hard at all. And what the government does economically is it gives both of them an equal measure of wealth. So it doesn't matter if one person works really hard and another person's a lazy bum. They're both going to have an equal amount of money no matter what. And so it robs people from their potential to be innovative. If you're going to work really hard but you're not going to reap the benefits of that, then why work hard at all, right? So this really devolves our society in some pretty important ways. And so we understand that, right? It's we might frame it this way: it's the equality of opportunity versus the equality of outcome. That's another way to phrase this. The equality of opportunity is the ideal that we are all equal under the law and that we all have opportunity to succeed. You have the opportunity to go get an education and to work hard and to treat people with dignity and respect. And you have the opportunity to do those things, and if you do those things well, if you take advantage of those opportunities, you will succeed, or likely succeed, and you will reap the benefits of doing those things, right? That's the opportunity, or the equality of opportunity, right? And that's how America used to be based upon. But equality of outcome is this idea of socialism. Equality of outcome is the idea that everybody must be equal. The outcome must be equal for everybody. And so, economically, that means that everybody must have the same amount of wealth no matter what they do. But when we look at this, and tie it to social issues, like our penal code, and essentially what this does is it says, it's the government inserting prejudice into the penal code, saying, these groups over here, we consider them to be protected classes. They're more important than non-protected classes, and we're going to ensure the outcome in that if someone punishes those protected classes because they don't have as much privilege, we're going to make sure that we're going to equal the outcome. That's kind of the idea. So in other words, pieces of legislation like this, different SOGI laws or discrimination ordinances, whatever you want to call them, essentially what it does is it's the government it's government using prejudice, creating special groups of people, identifying those groups of people as victims and everybody else as oppressors, and giving special favors, special carve-outs, special opportunities to the victim classes in order to make the outcome equal, right? So the oppressors, they have too much privilege, so that privilege has to be taken away, and it's taken away by doing this maneuvering within the legal code or penal code. It's that kind of idea. I hope you kind of follow that frame of thought. That's what's going on. That's what's going on here with this type of ordinance. And this has been happening all across the country. Like I mentioned, 48 out of 50 states have an ordinance or a piece of legislation like this on the books. Now, there's one more thing about this ordinance here. It has two provisions. Now, that's provision A, and let me back up and just say this about provision A. When we talk about enhanced penalties, there are some people who believe that based upon a certain crime, there should be enhanced penalties, okay? And that is a serious policy question. I don't want to take away from that. And we debated those type of things when I was in the legislature, and they're still debating those type of things on other issues today. It's a serious policy question, right? Do you give enhanced penalties or not? But there's a way to do that without inserting prejudice into the legal code and creating special classes of people. Ideally, it would be great if our legal code, our penal code, that there would be equality under the law, right? That it protects everyone. It doesn't protect some people more than others. It protects everybody equally. So, what could they do here? Well, what they could do is essentially they could, I'm just going to highlight this up in the screen, they could do something like this. They could strike out the highlighted language so that it would read something like this. No person shall maliciously and with the specific intent to intimidate or harm another person because of discrimination cause physical injury to another person. In other words, get rid of all those protected classes and just put in discrimination. If you discriminate against somebody, and you commit these crimes because of discrimination, then we're going to give you an enhanced penalty, right? That's one way to solve the issue without inserting the special classes. But you do something like this, and the alphabet crowd is going to squeal like a pig because they want the protected classes. All right, and this is one of those struggles between the right and the left. Now, why is the city of Gillette doing this? The city of Gillette is coming at it from the standpoint they're not trying to do this. They're not trying to make carve-outs or treat certain groups more special than others, except that's exactly what they're doing. But that's not what they're saying, okay? They're coming at this from an angle of they're backing away from the social issues aspect, and they're coming at it from an economic diversification standpoint. Now, for any of anybody who's lived in Wyoming or knows about Wyoming, we're the least populated state in the union. And we've always had trouble with economic diversification, right? We are a very mineral-reliant state. That is our main industry. We're subject to boom and bust cycles. And so the state and certain communities, Gillette being no exception, have continued to chase the golden egg of economic diversification. How can we make our communities, our state, more business friendly? We already don't have an income tax or a state income tax. We have some of the lowest taxes in the nation. We have some of the least regulations of all of the states, but we're still not attracting people. And so there's this race to see if we can't attract people, all right? And so this is what's going on kind of behind the scenes. And so the city of Gillette, we have what's called a city manager style of government, in that we have a mayor and we have a council, but the mayor doesn't really act like the mayor. The mayor is more of an at-large member of the city council, and they hire a city manager who essentially does what the traditional mayor would do, okay? And they have essentially charged the city manager and his staff to go ahead and try to figure out ways where they could improve the city of Gillette to make Gillette more business friendly, to attract businesses to come here so that we can have more economic diversification, all right? And so they went through this exercise, and this is essentially let me pull it up here on the screen. This is essentially their justification for this ordinance. All right, so I'll just read this. It says, council consideration of an ordinance establishing section 1442 of the Gillette City Code regarding malicious harm, establishing penalties and amending chapter 16, yada, yada, yada. Here's the background. Okay, this is important. Get a hold of this. Why are they doing this? Well, this is what they're saying. We're going to talk about what they're really doing here in a second. Background. The city of Gillette is a thriving municipality known for its strong sense of community and care for one another. The city council has continually prioritized strengthening the local economy through industry diversification and job creation by both existing and new businesses. The city aspires to attract businesses to relocate to Gillette utilizing our low tax and regulatory environment, right? That's what you would want to do, right? But that's not working. Why isn't that working? I'll tell you why it's not working. Because businesses need employees. Businesses need people. We don't have the population to support some of these businesses. It's just the way that it is. And that's not going to change unless we get an influx of people into our state. Nevertheless, they say this. The city also recognizes that our low unemployment rate will likely require employers to look outside the community for new employees. So they're envisioning that businesses are going to set up shop in Gillette where there is no labor pool, and so they're going to have to look outside of the state, outside of the city, to attract people to come in and to work for them, right? It's a little bit backwards, don't you think? That's the idea here. So they're going to look for employers are going to look outside the community for new employees. This ordinance aims to proactively address creating a safer environment for our residents, visitors, and potential future residents to increase community confidence in the fact that Gillette is truly welcoming and supportive of all people. In other words, they're making a statement that Gillette is it's a dangerous place to live. That we're so bad, we're like Chicago. We're like Portland. I mean, there's drugs everywhere on the city streets, and there's rampant crime. No, none of that is happening. None of that is happening at all. They're saying Gillette is not a safe place because we don't have this hate crimes ordinance in effect, which is really interesting because if you ask, and people have asked the city of Gillette to say, hey, do you have any supporting data to suggest that crimes are being perpetrated based upon discrimination? And guess what kind of data they have? They have none, zero cases where this is that essentially that this law would solve. In other words, they're creating a law for which there is no problem. But they are claiming that there is a problem. They are claiming that this community is bigoted and racist and discriminatory, and that people all the time are having their things vandalized, or people are getting beat up, or people are getting things stolen from them because of race and prejudice and gender identity and all these other things, all these special protected classes. That's their claim. Now, I don't know about you, but this is absolutely patronizing to the citizens of this great community. This is slamming you. This is, in a sense, defaming you. They are calling you out as something that you're not. And they're using that as justification to enact this hate crimes law to make the community safer for economic diversification. Do you see how ridiculous this is? Now, it goes on, and it says this. It gets better, right? This ordinance is not aimed at curtailing thought or speech. Yeah, right. We haven't looked at Section B yet, but that's exactly what it does. All Americans, now, they say the right things, right? This is... You talk about playing politics. It's happening even at our own city level. They know the right things to say. They're not stupid. And they're not going to be unethical and claim and come out and say, something that they know they shouldn't. They're just going to act unethical instead, and say the right things. It's doublespeak, right? The ordinance is not aimed at curtailing thought or speech. All Americans have the right to believe and speak freely. By passing this ordinance, the city establishes penalties for criminal acts perpetrated based on bias, hate, or discrimination. And that's true of Section A, but that's not true of Section B. This type of behavior creates a hostile environment that is harmful to both the victim of such crimes and the community as a whole, for which we have no evidence in the city of Gillette that this type of activity is going on. But they're claiming it does. They're claiming that we have a hostile environment in the city of Gillette and in Campbell County, and that's why we don't have economic diversification. Are you kidding me? Could you be more patronizing to the intelligence of good and well-meaning people of this community? It is absolutely dumbfounding that we have people in office and employees of the people in office who are feeding us this line of garbage. Goes on. The state of Wyoming is one of only 2 states in the nation that does not have a hate crime law on the books, as if we have to follow everybody else. That's actually probably a good thing. In fact, it's a selling point for why some people
why some people do come here. Because they've seen the antics of the left. They've seen the erosion of laws and the progression of these leftist kind of ideologies that have taken hold and taken root in public policy. When we think of like Chicago, folks, we think of LA, when we think of Portland, when we think of those places that are ridden with crime, New York City, they didn't get there all at once. It wasn't an overnight thing. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. It was these types of ordinances, these types of laws, public policies that seem pretty mundane and maybe even reasonable to some extent, but then it just continues to grow and grow, and it gets worse and worse, and then you have people who just flat out, their enforcement of the law, like some of these attorney generals, right? Why aren't they enforcing drug crime? Why aren't they? Because those people are victims, and we just can't victimize them anymore. So they're going to let crime grow rampant. I mean, that's kind of where this thing evolves too. That's the idea. All right, I'm rambling here. I need to get through this. All right, so this type of behavior creates a hostile environment that is harmful to both victim of such crimes and the community as a whole. Thank you, City of Gillette, for saying that our community is hostile. Absolutely ridiculous. No, what's hostile is your stance, your stature towards the people of this great community. That's what is hostile. That is repugnant. That is untenable. The state of Wyoming was one of only 2 states of the nation that does not have a hate crimes law in the book. To address this deficiency at the state level, because it couldn't get done at the state level because the legislature thankfully shot it down, several of Wyoming's largest municipalities have passed local ordinances dealing with anti-hate legislation, including Cheyenne, Casper, Laramie, and Jackson. What's interesting is Cheyenne, recently, within the last few years or so, they enacted this type of legislation. Guess how many crimes have been tried? How many people have been caught doing these hate crimes laws in Laramie County, Wyoming's largest county? A goose egg. 0. My understanding, there hasn't been anybody who's been charged with a hate crime in Laramie. The problem doesn't exist. There are 2 major components of this ordinance that goes on to say it prohibits people from injuring or threatening to injure another person or their property based upon the litany of protected classes that the government is now trying to create. Number 2, it prohibits people from inciting violence against another person on property or property based upon, again, the litany of other things. Now, this is where this gets dangerous. I mean, the whole thing is stupid and it's dangerous. But the second thing is, in particular, it is very egregious. It is egregious. It's an affront to your constitutional liberties. So this is what it says. The actual language. By the way, and I'm thinking about this, the city attorney claimed that Section A and Section B together, that both the criteria of Section A and Section B had to be met in order for someone to be convicted of this crime. But that's not how the ordinance reads. Usually if you want to connect something, you would insert an and, right? So if you're convicted of this crime if you do this, and you do this. That's not how this reads. Section B is its own new section. And so a person can be charged based upon Section B alone, according to how this is written. Now, the city attorney claimed that that wasn't the case. And which is just kind of dumbfounding to me, that he would say that, because that's not how the language reads. So it says this: no person shall incite or produce imminent violence directed at another person or a group of persons because of their race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, ethnicity, national origin, ancestry, or disability. Now notice, it goes on. This prohibition includes instances where a person's words, depictions, or conduct were intended and likely to incite or produce imminent violence against a person because of their race and all the protected classes again. In other words, this is an affront to your free speech. So if you have somebody in your public library who's doing some of this drag time stuff, and you think they're perpetrating on kids, and you call them out and you say, "You stay away from my kids or I will mess you up," you could be charged with a hate crime under Section B based upon what you said. It's an affront, it's an assault to to your freedom and your liberty. Now, I don't think that you should say mean things about people. People say and do repugnant things. I know that's true, even in my own case. I know there's people who they have bias and prejudice against people in wheelchairs, whatever, right? I have to deal with that. But I am a hardcore believer in the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. People, you do not have the right to not be offended. There's going to be some things that offend you. But what this law does is it creates a carve-out. It creates special classes. And it says if you offend them, now you're in trouble with the government. The government's going to get involved. The government's going to arrest you. The government's going to fine you, or the government might even throw you in jail. Let's look at what the penalty is. All right. Any person violating shall be guilty of a misdemeanor and punished according to provisions of 16:1. 16:1. Is this 16:1? I think that's 16:1 is amended to read. In the case of conviction of a charge of a violation of the following offenses, the offender is guilty of a misdemeanor is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by imprisonment of certain terms stated below, and not and a fine not exceeding $750 plus court costs or both. All right, so let's see. Looking at 90 days in jail. So anyway, you could go to jail for this. You could be subject to fines, and you could be subject to jail time based upon something that you said. So you can't speak out and say something against these protected classes. So if you think that, let's say, all of this, it's pretty well known now that this whole thing with the trans thing is a social contagion, especially amongst junior high and high school girls. That it is not something that is biologically driven. It is something that is socially driven, and it is causing serious harm. People are mutilating their bodies. They're taking hormones. It's akin to child abuse, and this whole trans thing is, let's call it what it is. It is a severe mental illness. It is a delusion, right? If you think that you are a gender that you're not, you are delusional. All right, you need help. But just that, what I said there, could that be considered a hate crime? Right? Am I going to be thrown in jail? This is obviously, it gives the people of this community some real cause for concern. They're worried. They're worried that the city of Gillette is going to make them criminals for the things that they say. The city of Gillette claims that this isn't to curtail free speech. BS! That's exactly what it's meant to do. Plus, one of our city councilwomen said so. So, of course, it's meant to curtail speech. Now, why do I think that this is going on? By the way, it passed the first reading on a 4-3 vote. And it's likely that that's probably not going to change. It's probably going to pass. Maybe it gets amended. It'd be great if it did. Let's get rid of the special classes. I'd love to see Section B eliminated altogether. It doesn't belong there at all. Section A, I don't like it. I would rather not have it. I don't think we need to have those enhanced crimes. I don't think we need to punish people based upon discrimination. Every crime is a hate crime, at least in my opinion. I just think it's redundant. I don't think you need that in the penal code. But if we have that, we have that. Let's at least get rid of all the special classes and just say if you do these crimes because of discrimination, that you're guilty of these things. All right? So why is this happening? What is going on? Well, the obvious answer is this is virtue signaling to the left. This is virtue signal. There's a reason that people like Wyoming Equality, these outfits that are lobbying for these type of things, they're doing this. This is virtue signaling. And that's exactly what it is. This is essentially giving a nod to these special people over here because, whatever, thoughts or feelings, that people are being mean to them or whatever. I don't know. And so they need special privilege. They need special protection by the government. That's really what it comes down to. But let's take this on from the business front, because this is where the city and even the people who are on the council who are advocating for this, they're claiming that, hey, this is good for business. This is good for the business environment. So let's just ask a question, reasonable question. When is it good for business, or for any person for that matter, for the government to practice discrimination and prejudice in its penal code. Right? Is that good? Is it good when the government looks at you not based upon the content of your character and your actions, but according to some other prejudicial group status that they've defined for you? Is that good? Is that good for business? Is that good for the business community? Do businesses thrive when there is prejudice and discrimination from the government? Of course not. That's not good for anybody. That's not good for business. It's not good for the business community. But, that being said, political correctness, at least for some corporations and some big businesses, political correctness is good for business. Political correctness means more money. And this is where I find this very interesting. Many of you know I'm the chairman of our county party. And there is a bit of a divide, not only in our county, but also in our state, also nationwide, even amongst Republicans. You have some of the more traditional Republicans, and the traditional Republicans have believed in prosperity, and I mean, these are the type of people who, used to really hang their hat on equality of opportunity. And the whole idea is, look, give people the opportunity to work hard and to build something from the ground up, and let's not have a lot of government regulation to knock people down. And let's give them a hand up, not a handout. Let's essentially the idea is, I'm trying to think of the right words here, a low regulatory environment so that people can be prosperous and make money, right? And that's what traditional Republicans have held on to. And so they've been about business. They've been about business rights. They've been about prosperity. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's all well and good. Democrats, on the other hand, traditional Democrats, have been more apt to focus on individuals, right? To protect the power of the individual, to protect individual rights. And that is praiseworthy too. We should have that. What's interesting, in especially since Trump came into office, is we've seen kind of a mix and a mash. And Trump was, he was a different bird because he was a populist in some ways, in that he was, in some sense, a traditional Republican, low business environment, low regulation environment for businesses, low taxes, things like that. Let businesses thrive, let people make money. But at the same time, he also had a thing for people, the rights of people, the rights for individuals. He kind of took that from the Democrat playbook. Like, hey, I'm concerned about your individual rights and your liberties and your freedoms, right? And this is where you have somewhat of a collision when it comes to even Republican infighting between traditional Republicans who have held on to this whole idea of, their main priority is prosperity, right? Money, business success. And now you have some of these populists coming in who are waving around their constitutions saying, yeah, but we want our individual rights. And businesses shouldn't trump on business, on our individual rights. And I think that whole dynamic, if you're following any of my rambling here, I think that dynamic is going on at even this local level. Because essentially what those in the council who are saying is we think this is going to be good for businesses. And what they mean is political correctness is good for business. So where I was going with this is today, it seems that businesses, and I'm painting with a broad brush, right? I know we have many business owners, and this doesn't apply to you. You care about people. Your businesses is a means to an end. It's for prosperity and to treat people with dignity and respect and so on and so forth. But there are some people, we call it crony capitalism or whatever, where essentially money is their god. And they will do anything for money, including trouncing on people's rights and liberties. And since political correctness means more money in their pockets or potential customers that will come their way, it's just good business to do the politically correct thing, right? It's just the cost of doing business. And so if the politically correct thing to do is to engage in social Marxism and put these type of laws in the books, Well, that's just a cost that everybody's going to have to deal with, but it means more money, and so it's a win for them, right? It's kind of the idea. And I think that's where this is going, where some of these people in the council are actually coming from. That, hey, this is good for, they honestly truly believe that this is good for business, right? Meanwhile, they are totally stomping on the individual rights and liberties and the Constitution of the United States and the state of Wyoming. I think that's what's truly going on. I think this is more, they truly believe that this is somehow going to be good for some businesses, or it's going to attract people to our community by doing these prejudicial things. And they look at this as just the cost of doing business. Your freedoms and your liberties being taken from you are just the cost of doing business so someone else can make a buck. Now again, that's my thoughts, and I could be wrong on that, but I don't think I am. I think that's where this thing is going. I think that's the real motivation behind this, and they're doing just despicable things. This ordinance isn't good for anybody. All right, I've rambled on long enough. Listen, share this with others. Tell people to get out. Tell people to speak their minds. Social Marxism, critical race theory, these type of policies where the government is inserting prejudice and bigotry into the penal code. It's the government doing the discriminating by making these special classes. That's not good for anybody, including businesses. That's not going to make Gillette more safe. That's not going to make Gillette more business friendly. Now, it may be politically correct, and maybe some business is going to try to capitalize that, and they may get some customers or whatever because of this political correct garbage, but it's going to come at the cost of everybody else. And if your city council truly cares about you and wants to represent you and not some business somewhere, well then they should say no to this ill-cited ordinance. All right. Take care, folks. This is Scott Clem with Preaching in Politics, and I'm out.